Aloha and welcome to our video on bonding patterns. Today we have three things we're going to talk about. The first is chemical reactions. Then we'll talk about some bond types. We'll talk about the covalent bond and we'll talk about the ionic bond. Okay, before we talk about our bonding patterns and our chemical reactions, I want to go review the atom with you real quickly. Here we have our simple model again. Notice in the middle we have our nucleus, and in there we have our protons. Okay, remember the proton has a positive charge. It's the defining characteristic of an element. So the number of protons tell me which element we have. In this case we have 11, and that tells me that I have sodium. So this is a model of a sodium atom. Orbiting around the nucleus is where we find our electrons. And remember, the electrons have a negative charge to them. They're also much smaller than the protons. And the ones that we're really concerned about are going to be the ones that are in the outermost ring. So this one right here is going to be the one that we're most concerned with. And that is because it's called a valence electron, and those are the ones that are involved in bonding. And we'll learn more about that in a little bit. Okay, so what is a chemical reaction? Quite simply, a chemical reaction is when we mix elements together to form a compound or something new. We're going to use a real simple example here. We have our reactants here in green, and the reactants are going to be mixed together. We're going to add a little bit of energy, and we're going to come up with our product over here. In this case, what we're doing is we're taking hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, and we met them a little earlier in the unit. We add a little bit of an explosion, and then we get a new compound, which is water over here. So our reaction can be several different ways. We can write it out as words, as you see down at the very bottom here, or we can use the element symbols to kind of show us a mathematical one. One thing I want to point out is when you see the arrow, that tells us it yields, and the arrow shows us the direction of the reaction, so the way that it's going. Sometimes you'll hear these also called as chemical equations, but for now we're just going to use them as a reaction statement. Okay, so the first bond we're going to talk about is the covalent bond. And in the covalent bond, the valence electrons are the outermost electrons. Remember, those are the ones that are involved in bonding. These are going to be shared. So they share the electrons between the two atoms. In our example here, we're going to use water once again. And we have a hydrogen atom here and a hydrogen atom here. And then we have our oxygen atom, which is going to be right here. And we know it's that because if we look here in the nucleus with 8 protons, that tells me it's oxygen. And over here with 1 proton, we know that we have hydrogen. Now, hydrogen normally has 1 electron. Okay, so that we'll put a box around that 1 electron there, and we'll put a box around this one so we know which is which. Now, it has space for 2 electrons in its orbital. So it's going to look to borrow 1 of those electrons from oxygen, and that'll be this one here. And when they share like that, what we notice is that both the hydrogen atoms have 2 electrons now that can orbit around it. And that makes that a very happy atom, and it's very stable, and it likes to be that way. Now, oxygen is a little bit different. It has in its outermost shell 6 electrons. Okay, and we can see the 6 ones in purple here, and it's missing 2. So by sharing 1 with hydrogen and having hydrogen share 1 back in both cases, it fills those empty holes, and we see that in this outermost ring for oxygen, it has its 8 electrons, and we'll learn that 8 is the magic number, and that makes that part very happy as well. So because both of the hydrogens and the oxygen, all 3 of them have their outermost shell filled because of the sharing, it makes it a very stable molecule, and water is such. So the big thing to remember in a covalent bond is that we have shared electrons, okay? The other type of bond we're going to talk about is an ionic bond. In an ionic bond, we form ions, and if you remember, ions are where we give or gain an electron. Okay, so by giving away an electron, we become a positive ion. By gaining an electron, we become a negative ion. So here we go again, and we can find our sodium ion here, and we know it's sodium because it has the 11 protons. And notice that it has this 1 single solitary electron, 1 valence electron in its outermost shell. If we take a peek real quickly at chlorine, chlorine has 17 protons, so normally it has 17 electrons, and the last orbital here has 7 of them. Okay, so under normal circumstances, it has one empty space. So what happens is this sodium ion has only one in its outermost shell, and if it can get rid of that one, then this outermost shell doesn't really have to have any in it, and the next one is going to be full. That's this one here, and that'll give it its 8, and it'll be a happy atom. Remember, the magic number was 8, and you'll learn a lot about that in our lessons, so I'm not going to go into it too much here. But with our chlorine, it had 7 in the outermost one, and if it gains one, it gets to its magical number of 8, and it'll be happy that way. The net result, however, is that my sodium ion now has a net positive charge, and my chlorine atom is going to have a net negative charge. And in nature, one of the real cool things is opposites attract. So the attraction between this positive charge and this negative charge is what keeps sodium chloride or salt together. So just to review real quickly, I want you to remember we had two types of bonds. We have covalent, okay, and in a covalent bond we share the electrons. And then we have the ionic bonds, and in the ionic bonds we give them or gain them. Okay, so we give away electrons, we form ions. And those are the two bonds that we'll talk about in the lessons, and those are the primary ones. Okay, we'll see you in the next video.